It's Andre from High Performance Academy, and we're at World Time Attack with Mitch from Haltech, and we're going to be talking about Jared Magg's R33 open class race car. Now, Mitch, it's a beautifully presented car. I know that you've had some involvement with the technical side of the ECU tuning, and we wanted to really talk about what exactly makes a competitive open class car tick. Certainly this year, the competition has stepped up a lot in this open class. For a start, let's talk about what makes it, what powers it. Can you tell us the engine that's in the car?
Yep, so at the moment it's a 2.8 litre RB engine. So yeah, factory 26 block with a stroker kit put in it. Turbo side, it's a Precision 6870. A little bit different on the exhaust manifold too. We actually run like a Pro Mod style manifold, which gets the wastegate right up the front of the motor. Very important for cooling. A lot of the GTRs here have cooling issues with wastegates and exhaust systems. So done that. Electronic side, it's a race pack smart wire for a PDM. That integrates with the Haltech Elite 2500. And,
let's just, before we get into the electronics, just want to focus still on that engine package.
Yep.
So we've got the RB28, we've got the Precision Turbo, and just in terms of the power it's producing and the boost level, can you let us know what that is?
Yeah, so we run the engine on ethanol E85, 32 pounds, the car makes 600 kilowatts at all four on our dyno at Haltech, and it's a pretty stout package.
Yeah, that's getting the job done. Okay, now moving on to that electronics package, and you've got the Elite 2500 ECU in this. Now, obviously when you're pushing an engine that far, that hard, and it's been beaten up on lap after lap, when you're running that sort of boost pressure, a lot of room for error, a lot of things that can go wrong. So what in the Elite ECU is being utilised to try and safeguard the engine and make sure it does remain reliable?
Yeah, so we've basically put as many sensors on the engine that we can cram in there, along with all of that data to basically feed all the closed loop systems in the ECU itself, and then have those systems have a long-term procedure to basically learn the more that the car's out on the track.
Now, this is one of the benefits, I guess, that Haltech introduced with the Elite ECU, and it is relatively unique to the Elite ECU as this long-term or self-learning. So just for our viewers who aren't aware of how that works, you've got a system that, let's say, for example, we're talking about boost control. Over a long term, it can, if the boost isn't reaching the target, it will adjust a long-term trim so that your boost remains consistent, correct?
Yeah, spot on. So with the boost control example, we have like a base duty cycle table based on your target pressure. The ECU looks at what your base table is compared to what it actually needs to get to the target, and it then populates that long-term table over time with that difference.
Now, from your own experience with tuning, if you looked at the benefits of having that additional long-term trim over just a well-tuned closed-loop boost control system, what sort of advantages are we likely to see?
Yeah, look, don't get me wrong, you still definitely need to tune the closed-loop system. The long-term trim is there purely just as a trim. The benefits I see are sort of environmental changes, and especially with a car like this that does get very, very hot and the driver does like to do multiple laps. When you're talking heat and differing environmental stuff like air temperature and just the temperature of the day, you will see the trim sort of picking up that difference sort of morning to afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from the cool of the morning to the heat of the middle of the day, and then again it tends to cool down in the afternoon. That's all going to affect the way the engine performs and that boost pressure. Let's move on, and you mentioned also closed loop control for the fueling.
Yep.
Now, I know that a lot of tuners won't rely on closed loop or don't like to use closed loop control. Let's talk through that and give us the pros and cons of using closed loop fuel control anytime the car's out on track.
Yeah, so obviously with the lambda in the exhaust system, we can obviously sense that the air fuel ratio at all times. We've got our target lambda map in the ECU as well. Probably again, environmental changes, heat in the engine. Of course, your base fuel table does need to be really well tuned. And then
actually, I'll just touch on that as well, because I know that a lot of tuners, particularly novice tuners, think that these closed loop systems are a fix for actually not having to do the job properly in the first place. You still actually need to tune the engine.
Oh, 100%. You know, our system will allow you to trim plus or minus 50% in the short term and the same in the long term, but that may be okay if you're just idling around town to get your rough shape of your base map in your standard car. In a car like this, and really any car that a tuner has to do the fuel mapping on, it does need to be correct in the first place. The O2 control is there just as a safeguard and to keep everything basically on target.
Now, moving on as well, you've got an Albin sequential gearbox in the car, and again, there are leaders controlling the gear shift, ignition cut, I'm assuming, on upshift, but it's also closed loop. So can you talk us through that system?
Yeah, so we've got a load cell on the gear shifter. The ECU looks at that. When the ECU detects a request from the driver and all of the parameters are met, so we have a min throttle position, a minimum engine RPM, and the ECU actually needs to know what gear it's currently in. The ECU will initialize a cut, so we can have a configurable percentage power reduction on the engine, which can either be done with fuel, ignition retard, a combination of any of the three. So on this car, we're purely just using an ignition cut with about 90% power cut. Once that happens, the ECU then looks at the barrel position sensor of the sequential, waits for the sequential to engage the next gear. Once the ECU knows that the sequential is in the next gear, it'll then release that cut over a predetermined mappable time.
So that cut is as long or as short, hopefully as short as it needs to be for the next gear to be engaged. Now, give us the advantages mechanically of that system over the more traditional or older, just physically a timed cut.
Yeah, so with a timed cut, you basically have a set time every time there's a gear request come through. With a closed loop system, obviously between every gear and differing engine speeds and engine loads, that cut time is going to change. Especially even with, say, a misshift, where maybe the driver doesn't quite pull on that shifter hard enough, the barrel may get stuck in between. The ECU will actually hold onto that cut for a maximum amount of time, say 1 or 2 seconds, to give the driver the opportunity to fix that. In an open loop system, you don't have that. You need to sort of make sure that every shift is correct, and there's too many variables.
So essentially what you're getting is the shortest possible cut time. If you're using a timed cut and you really wanted to get that shortest possible timed cut, you risk having the engine power being re-engaged while the driver's still partway through the shift. Now, in terms of the shift time, just because I know a lot of our viewers are interested in that, how long does a typical shift take in a gearbox like the Albin's?
So with this Albin's, we're seeing through the logging that the average time that the ignition cut is active is between 35 and 50 milliseconds, depending on, like I said before, load, RPM, where the driver is on the track. So roughly, 40 milliseconds I would say is probably the average.
Now, with a car that's making a lot of power like this, 600 kilowatts, it's being pushed quite hard. When the car comes back into the pits and the data is downloaded, what are the essential aspects that are being looked at first?
So probably the first thing I will look at on this particular car, we have EGT sensors in each exhaust runner. So that's probably the first thing I'll look at is probably our max EGT from that session. As long as they're sort of within our usual numbers that we're used to seeing with the car, I'll go through and make sure there's been no funny issues with the fuel system. We're pretty much at the maximum for the fuel pump in this car, so I'll go through and check the injector pressure differential channel, make sure that's not taken a dive anywhere, and then just basically check the trims, make sure nothing's gone crazy with the trims.
So engine health is really your first priority. Before you worry about anything else, you're really looking to make sure that the engine isn't exhibiting any real problems. Just moving back to the car itself, R33, it's a heavy car compared to some of the runners in the open class. How much of a problem is that realistically?
Look, I guess there are some guys that run replacement panels and everything like carbon to try and reduce the weight. The 33 GTR being probably the heaviest of the three. It takes a bit of a hit in terms of pushing that car around. I think this car is still all metal front to back. The weights, I don't think the weight is a problem with the power. I think probably aero takes a bigger hit on the power than weight does. We were seeing the tyres just get hammered here with the weight of the car. Yeah, big heavy girl, but she gets around.
That is one thing we're hearing with the compound that's being used here at World Time Attack. It really is a compound that is only good for 1 or perhaps 2 laps, and on the heavier cars we're hearing that compound, it's a struggle to maintain good tyre temperature for just 1 flying lap. Look, Mitch, thank you for giving us some insight on the car. We've still got a couple of sessions to go. The car's currently, I believe, running around about the middle of the pack, so best of luck for the team to improve. Thanks for letting us know what makes it tick.
Sweet, no worries, thank you.